I want to start off how to sell a house with tenants. I can't tell you how often that we run into challenges with this, so I want to give you some tips here. If you're out there and you own a home as a rental property or a second home and you have tenants, it can be a real challenge to sell it. I think the very first problem you have with tenants is that they don't have a vested interest in the sale of the home. Generally speaking, sometimes they don't really want to deal with the inconveniences of the showings. They've paid a lease, and their lease generally has terms that allow you to show it and sell it. But unfortunately, those don't line up with the convenience factor, which is, there's going to be some times when an agent or a buyer is going to want to see it with 1 or 2 hour notice. Most leases have a 24 or 48 hour provision of notice required, so you miss out on some potential people. So, an article from Zillow, they give you the first option, which is wait for the lease to expire. I think most real estate agents encourage that because you can fix up any issues, you can eliminate any showing and access challenges, you can make any repairs. Tenants, not always, but a lot of the time don't take as good a care as an owner, so there's some deferred maintenance that you have to take care of. Option 2, selling while the tenant is still there. This is one of those, if you're selling while the tenant is still there, it's one of those obstacles that comes into play because they may not take great care of the home. I think there are some things you can do to get the tenant to buy in, to help with that process, to help you sell it, to get a vested interest in it. But unfortunately, I can tell you how often we've sold homes with tenants in it, and it's a challenge. The tenant, leaves stuff all over the place. They don't clean up or pick up after themselves. They double lock the door when they're not supposed to. Their dog they leave out. There's so many things because for them, they're not getting a financial benefit. In fact, they're getting an inconvenience from the selling process. So looking at it from their perspective, what's the benefit for them in selling the property? Unless there's a family relationship or something.
Yeah, so if I'm a seller and I say, Andrew, I got a tenant in here, and, I understand getting the tenant out is a better way to sell a house, but I don't know how long it's going to take to sell the house, assuming.
Sure.
So I'm going to have to cover this nut on this house
Sure.
while it's vacant, while I'm waiting for it to sell. So I don't know if I want to sell, okay,
Sure.
because of that. So hence, the option is just to keep it renting. So, but if I really want to sell and I want to make it a win-win for the tenant to help me sell it, what ninja tips do you have?
Oh, ninja tips. We're going to get that trending on Twitter. Hashtag ninja tips. So hashtag ninja tips. So I love to hear it. The one time I've ever said ninja tips on the show, I think maybe I've said it twice. So here's a recommendation. First and foremost, you obviously want to keep the income. Offer the tenant a financial incentive. So let's say, for example, that the rent is $2,000 a month. Offer them $200 a month off the rent for every month that they don't turn down showing. So that encourages them, that gives them a financial benefit to say yes, everyone wants to see the property. You can also offer them a financial incentive, so you can discount the rent. You can modify the terms of the deposit. You can modify the terms of the lease to give them some sort of benefit so that you keep the majority of the income and you don't lose it all, but they've got some vested interest in it. You can even do things, in terms of letting them out of the lease if they find a home. I think that's one thing. Once they know that you're putting it up for sale, a lot of times they know the writing's on the wall for them. They're not going to be leaving the property, or they may be encouraged to leave the property early. They know that they're not going to extend and stay in there if you're selling it. So they may find something ahead of time, but not come to you and say, hey, man, I'd really like to buy this place, because they know they got several months on their lease. So you can offer some creative things to them to allow them to start the process of shopping sooner. You can offer financial incentives. I think another thing is if you've been a great landlord, you've taken care of repairs, you've not been a bad landlord and not taking care of stuff, they'll be more likely to help you. So that's another thing that you can think about. If you're planning on selling a property in 2 or 3 years and you've had a long-term tenant in there, and you're coming up close to that period of time where you might sell it, it's one of those moments where you probably don't want to hassle with the tenant as much about any requested repairs or anything that they want to get accomplished, because the nicer you are to them and the more you give to them, the more likely they are to turn around and say, you know what, he's been a great landlord. He helped fix this sink. He helped do this. He did that. He didn't hit me with a late fee when I was 10 days late. So be a little bit more accommodating, and then just have a conversation with them. I mean, tenants are people too, and a lot of times tenants are home buyers and home sellers as well. They're just in a temporary position. So a lot of times they'll understand your situation, and again, giving them a vested interest, I think, will help. Being upfront and honest with them about the situation, and then being a great landlord. I think all of those things help you overcome that obstacle in a lot of circumstances, but not always.
I have a question. So obviously, you might not know this because you do more buying than renting, but is there something up front that when they're signing the lease that you can place in there?
Oh yeah, and we do that too. So we own a lot of rental property, and in our leases we have clauses that if we sell it, we have the ability to give them a certain amount of notice. And there are clauses that you can put in there that say, I mean, up front, if we happen to sell the property and you don't turn down showings, then your lease, your monthly amount goes down to XYZ%. As real estate brokers, we've also seen instances where there's been a clause in the lease that allows the buyer to get out of the lease. We've even let buyers out of the lease when they've wanted to buy and then they've bought with us. So they bought with our company and they went out of their lease 6 months early. Yeah, we'll work on that. So there's all kinds of little things you can do. And I think that unfortunately sometimes you get so used to using a standard generic lease instead of thinking ahead of time about your exit strategy. So if your plan is to lease that home for 2 years and they're signing a 2-year lease, why don't, like you said, David, right up front, go ahead and get that out of the way now and tell them, hey, look, at the end of the 2-year period, we're going to be selling this. So you're transparent.
Yeah, I wonder. Of course, we don't have Erico property management here today. We don't have Paul here today, but I just wonder how much of a disincentive that would give the tenant to sign a lease that says something like that.
And again, I think it goes back to transparency. It certainly can, help. I would say that there are plenty of tenants out there right now wanting to lease good properties. But I think if you're transparent, no matter what, even if you turn a few away, it'll save yourself the hassle of 2 years down the line saying, okay, it's time to go, and then having obstacles and challenges of them not wanting to leave. So I think you'd be transparent with them, and at the same time, there's always different creative things you can do. I've had people that have great relationships with their tenant not offer financial incentive, and it go great. But then we've had properties that we've put on the market that have tenants in it that have been an absolute nightmare with dog poo all over the place and people not picking up and trash everywhere and what looks like a fraternity block party in the house every single weekend when we go to show it. So I think you gotta know your tenant. If your tenant takes great care of it, that's a good sign. But again, even a tenant that takes great care of it may have a lot of pride in their home, which means they may be wanting to limit access. They may not want you just showing up anytime that you want to see the property.
So, Dave, you're the resident millennial, as we said many times on the show.
And you're the resident old guy, so
I'm the resident old guy.
Good morning.
Nice. That's right. I'll get you back a little later to show. And so you got a lot of friends that are renting. So how would they feel about having a discount to show the property?
Yeah, I mean that's a tough call, man. I think it's going to go on.
If you keep, by the way, you have to keep the room clean too.
Yeah, are we talking about the friends that have the frat parties, the friends that have
I think again, it's going to depend on the person, right? Just
right.
like with anything, like you can't when you're selling a home with the tenant in it, there's no rubber stamp for it. Unfortunately, there are going to be people who are going to prefer not to deal with it, even if you give them a couple $100 a month. So it's one of those things. What option one, sell it after the tenant's out. But if you have to sell it with the tenant in there for financial reasons or for whatever reason, then check those boxes off and see if any of those will work. Sometimes they won't, and your only option is to wait till the tenant.
I mean, everybody has a price to have somebody walk through their house.
Sure, but you also have to look at also have to look at whether it's reasonable or not. I mean, if the rent's $2,000 and they want $1,000 a month, forget that. But a couple $100 a month is probably worth your time to offer that.
It is, but the other thing that you have to consider is privacy. Now, I know a lot of people that actually prefer to rent houses instead of apartments because apartments have the clause where they can walk into your apartment at any time.
Yeah.
To do any kind of maintenance or whatever, and there's a lot of privacy concerns with that. So that could be.
I think the thing that we sell to the tenant and tell to the tenant is, look, we're going to sell the home fast if you give us access. If you don't give us access, you're going to draw the process out longer, and you're going to have more privacy issues because it's going to take forever to sell, and you're going to be dealing with it for longer. If you give us access for a month and really open the doors up, then we're going to make it happen. I think the other thing is when you're selling a tenant-occupied property, you got to price it aggressively. You can't price it high because you're going to have so many other obstacles: the deferred maintenance, the access issues. If you price it aggressively and tell the tenant, "Hey, look, we're not going to be in this thing forever," they're going to be more likely to accommodate you. But if it stretches for a real long period of time, it's going to frustrate them, and they're going to, it's going to be inconvenient.